Before the United States existed, before flags, constitutions, and founding myths, the American colonies were something far more important to the world's great powers, a resource. They were not a nation, not even a unified people, but a collection of profitable territories sitting on land rich with timber, crops, and strategic ports. To Britain, the colonies were an extension of empire, a source of raw materials, a captive market, and a vital link in a global trade network that stretched from India to the Caribbean. To Britain's rivals, those same colonies were a vulnerability, a pressure point waiting to be exploited. In the 18th century, empires did not rise or fall based on ideals. They rose and fell based on trade routes, naval dominance, and economic control. Britain understood this better than anyone. Its navy ruled the seas, its merchants dominated commerce, and its colonies funded wars across the globe. The American colonies were deeply embedded in this system. They were expected to produce, trade only with Britain, and remain politically obedient. For decades, this arrangement worked until it became too expensive. After the 7 Years' War, Britain emerged victorious but deeply in debt. Protecting the colonies, defending borders, and maintaining troops overseas drained the treasury. London looked west and saw an obvious solution: make the colonies pay more. New taxes, stricter enforcement, and tighter control followed. To British officials, this was reasonable. To colonists, it felt like exploitation without representation. But what neither side fully realized was that their conflict was being closely observed far beyond the Atlantic. France, humiliated by defeat in the 7 Years' War, had lost territory, prestige, and influence to Britain. Spain had suffered similar losses. The Netherlands saw its trade threatened by British expansion. These powers did not yet care about American independence, but they cared deeply about British weakness. The colonies' growing resistance was not just a protest. It was a crack in the armor of the strongest empire on earth. At this stage, the idea of a fully independent America was still radical, even dangerous. Most colonists wanted reform, not revolution. Many still considered themselves British. Loyalty to the crown ran deep, especially among merchants, landowners, and those dependent on imperial protection. This internal division would later tear communities apart. But to foreign powers, the divisions made the colonies even more useful. A divided enemy is easier to manipulate. What made the situation explosive was geography. The colonies were far away from Britain but dangerously close to French and Spanish interests in the Americas. Control of North America meant control of trade routes, naval supply lines, and future expansion. If Britain lost its colonies, it wouldn't just lose land, it would lose its dominance. That possibility terrified London and excited its enemies. Long before independence was declared, European courts began asking the same question. What if Britain could be weakened without a direct war? What if rebellion could do the work armies could not? The American colonies were becoming more than restless territories. They were becoming leverage in a global power struggle. And once that realization took hold, the fate of the colonies was no longer entirely in their own hands. France did not fall in love with the American cause. France fell in love with the idea of Britain losing. After the 7 Years' War, French pride was wounded, its finances strained, and its global influence diminished. Britain had taken colonies, trade advantages, and prestige. Direct war was risky and expensive. When unrest in the American colonies escalated, French intelligence took notice immediately. Agents were dispatched, reports were written, and secret discussions began in Versailles. The question was not whether the colonies deserved independence, but whether supporting them could cripple Britain. The answer, increasingly, was yes. Open support would provoke war with Britain before the colonies had proven they could survive. Instead, France chose secrecy. Weapons were shipped under false company names. Gunpowder, muskets, uniforms, and cannons flowed across the Atlantic disguised as commercial trade. Money was funneled through intermediaries. Officially, France was neutral. In reality, it was already at war, just not openly. Benjamin Franklin arrived in Paris not as a revolutionary hero, but as a calculated gamble. France needed to know whether the American rebellion had a chance. Franklin, with his wit, intelligence, and carefully crafted image, became the face of American legitimacy. He played the role perfectly, charming intellectuals, impressing nobles, and convincing ministers that supporting America was not reckless, but strategic. Yet France hesitated. Early American defeats raised doubts. Could these colonies really defeat Britain? Or would France simply anger its greatest rival for nothing? The turning point came when American forces proved they could win, not just survive. Victory at Saratoga shocked Europe. It proved that Britain was vulnerable and that the rebellion was not a temporary disturbance. For France, this was the signal. In 1778, France openly allied with the United States. The decision was less about freedom and more about timing. By entering the war, France transformed a colonial rebellion into a global conflict. British resources were suddenly stretched thin. Fleets clashed across oceans. Troops were diverted. Britain was no longer fighting farmers, it was fighting an empire. But France's support came with consequences. Loans piled up. War expenses exploded. While America gained independence, France gained debt. The same financial strain that fueled the American Revolution would later help ignite the French Revolution. In trying to destroy Britain's dominance, France planted the seeds of its own collapse. Revenge came at a devastating price. Spain's involvement in the American Revolution was quieter, more cautious, and deeply conflicted. Unlike France, Spain had no interest in promoting rebellion. It ruled a vast colonial empire of its own and feared that American independence could inspire uprisings from Mexico to South America. Yet Spain also despised British power. Britain threatened Spanish territories, trade routes, and influence in the New World. Spain wanted Britain weakened, but not replaced by a powerful new republic. As a result, Spain played a dangerous double game. Officially, it refused to recognize the United States. Unofficially, it supplied money, weapons, and intelligence. Spanish-controlled ports became lifelines for American forces. Supplies flowed through New Orleans and up the Mississippi River, bypassing British blockades. One of the most overlooked figures of the war, Bernardo de Galvez, led Spanish campaigns that devastated British positions in the Gulf Coast. His victories forced Britain to fight on multiple fronts, further draining its resources. Yet even as Spanish forces helped secure American success, Spain avoided public alliance. They wanted influence without responsibility. Spain's greatest fear was not British defeat, it was American ambition. An independent United States could expand westward, threaten Spanish holdings, and destabilize colonial rule. Spain's support was tactical, not ideological. Once Britain was weakened, Spain intended to protect its own empire at all costs. This contradiction defined Spain's role. Help the rebels, but never trust them. Aid independence, but fear its consequences. In the end, Spain gained territory and weakened Britain, but it failed to stop the tide of independence sweeping the Americas. The forces unleashed in North America would eventually reach Spain's own colonies, just decades later. Wars are not won by bravery alone. They are won by money. And when the American Revolution nearly collapsed under financial strain, it was the Netherlands that quietly kept it alive. Dutch bankers, merchants, and financiers saw profit and opportunity in America's struggle. The Dutch Republic was a commercial powerhouse deeply invested in global trade. British dominance threatened Dutch interests, especially maritime commerce. When American agents approached Dutch financiers, they found willing partners. Loans were issued, credit extended, and weapons supplied. This financial support was so significant that Britain eventually declared war on the Netherlands over it. America was fighting for independence from imperial control, yet it was being sustained by foreign debt. These loans ensured survival but also shaped America's future. From its birth, the United States was tied to international finance and foreign obligations. Independence came with invisible chains. The Dutch involvement highlights a hidden truth. Revolutions require investors. Ideals inspire people, but money sustains wars. Without Dutch credit, the American cause might have collapsed long before victory. Freedom, in this case, was financed. The American Revolution was not just a war against Britain. It was a war among Americans. Communities were divided, families torn apart, and trust shattered. Loyalists, those who remained faithful to the crown, were not rare. In some areas, they were the majority. To them, rebellion meant chaos, economic ruin, and violence. Informants reported neighbors. Letters were intercepted. New York became a hub of British intelligence, while George Washington built one of the most effective spy networks of the war. The Culper Ring used codes, dead drops, and invisible ink to outmaneuver British agents. Benedict Arnold's betrayal shocked the nation, but it was not unique. It was simply the most famous example of shifting loyalties in a war where survival often mattered more than ideology. The revolution forced impossible choices. Neutrality was dangerous. Loyalty could get you killed. This internal conflict left scars that lasted long after independence. Property was confiscated. Loyalists fled or were punished. The victory of the revolution created a nation, but it also created bitterness, loss, and unresolved divisions. America was born not only through unity, but through betrayal.